Hey everyone, Justin Thind here, and welcome to another episode of the SD4L show. Today's episode will be a discussion with my colleague, Stephen Brooks, the Michigan State beat writer for 247Sports. Big fan of his work, not just saying that because I work with him. Think he's one of the foremost authorities on Michigan State athletics, and always recommend reading him. Before I turn it over to my conversation with Stephen, a little disclaimer. The episode that we were recording kind of had the first 13 minutes of the audio file corrupted somehow at the onset of saving it. So you will get the final 30 minutes or so of that. It coincidentally picked up right where we were talking about the win-loss predictions right at the beginning of that discussion. Before that, kind of the discussion was centered around the QB play, the wide receiver 2 and 3 spots, and pretty much the standards of they have to make a bowl game this year, unless there's injuries that are even worse than last year. There really isn't any excuse to not at least win 6 games, even though it's probably going to be harder to win more than that. We'll get to that, though, in the actual part of the discussion that should be playing here shortly. But the quarterback play and the wide receiver play, kind of similar sentiments there. For both spots, there should be enough guys where the baseline play shouldn't be too bad to the point where they don't win 6 games. The ceiling is probably not that great, but the floor should be at a decent spot. At quarterback, one of Noah Kim or Kaiten Hauser should be able to help the program tread water enough this year so that they win 6 games, even if neither of them are spectacular. But I guess it is possible they could be spectacular or they could be horrible. But for the most part, when you have 2 guys that are neck and neck like that, the floor shouldn't be too low. And then wide receiver, same thing. After Trey Mosley, you're looking at Alante Brown, Montori Foster, Tyrell Henry, Jerron Glover, Christian Fitzpatrick, Antonio Gates. So with the amount of people that you're looking at for those 2 spots after Trey Mosley, you'd think that 2 of those guys should be able to hit just playing the odds. And by hit, just meaning like at a baseline Big Ten level. Again, that's probably not going to be good enough to get them to like 10 wins or anything like that. But in terms of them making a bowl game, in that context, that should be good enough. But yeah, that pretty much summarizes and paraphrases what that part of the discussion was. Obviously, it was much longer, but you can get Steven's full thoughts when he releases his win-loss record piece here in the coming days. I'll be putting mine out as well, probably either Wednesday or Thursday. But yeah, with that said, here's my conversation with Stephen Brooks. There's a glass ceiling after a certain extent, but I think getting to six wins shouldn't be too hard. Oh, and the bye there is between the at Iowa and the at Rutgers games. So that's 2 weeks before the Michigan game. So I guess Stephen, what do you think their record will be? I guess we can have a discourse after that of why you are at that mark, but I guess right away let's rip off the band-aid.
Yeah, just reveal the ending right away. Right now, I'm at 6-6. I will probably stay with that. I've said it enough times. I got to get it written probably here in the next say day or two.
Right.
I am going to go game by game, but I am at 6-6. I do think I agree with you, of course. I mean, the schedule is very, very difficult, and I
Mhm.
think everything to me fits pretty snugly into one of 3 boxes where it's like definite, high probable loss, high probable win, coin flip.
Right.
I think I can pretty much put each of them in one of those 3 boxes pretty evenly.
Mhm. That makes sense. The way that I was kind of arranging it, like, in my head and the way that I've drafted in the article, which now I might have to change just because I was not aware that Maryland's season win total was at 7.5, when I made this, but the way that I kinda arranged the tiers was, there was 4 games that are gonna be very hard to win. That's the Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Washington games. Then the tier below that, I had split 1, and that was at Nebraska and at Iowa. And then the tier below that, I had probably should win as Maryland. And then the 4 other remaining teams as the most likely will win. Kind of my rationale for the Maryland game being a notch easier than the Nebraska and the Iowa games was the fact that last year Michigan State went over to Maryland. I think their defense had the best 2 quarters they did, other than maybe up until the Illinois game. In the second half of that, where the offense then couldn't do a single thing. Maryland had Raheem Jarrett. Michigan State was in the midst of their injury riddled spell. Nothing was really working defensively. I think they went to some 3-4 in that game, got some stops. All of that said, with the struggling roster in the middle of the cold streak, all the way out in the East Coast, they were in that game for pretty much the entire part of that. Raheem Jarrett is now gone. This game's at home. I just think that if the program wants to at least tread water, if not take another step, you just have to win that game at home. Maybe saying they should win it is maybe a little bit of a stretch. I guess they should be in the toss-up category, but what do you make of that game, Steven?
Yeah, that's one of those hinge games for me that's in my coin flip,
Mhm.
middle bucket there. I agree with you that they should, and to calm the waters, which I think it's going to be ugly against Washington. Yeah, I don't think that's a good matchup for Michigan State right now, especially at least at that point in the season. So
Mhm.
I think you're going to want to calm the waters with another home game that following week, and hopefully if you're Michigan State, you get that one done. But like I said, they're firmly in my coin flip bucket. I mean, I think outside of that top four, I definitely agree with you. Those are the four hardest games. I put going to Iowa and playing out at Kinnick, right, just a hair below them.
Right.
I'm really big on Iowa and what they've done this offseason. I've loved what they've done offensively in the transfer portal. I think it's going to be a night and day difference for them, for compared to how bad they were
Yeah.
offensively last year. I think they're going to be just fine this year. Now they're not going to light up, not going to set any records, but they're going to be a good Iowa offense, I think.
Yeah.
But to your point, the Maryland game, I wonder about them. Replacing, as you said, Jarrett and Dante Demas.
Oh,
Was
yeah,
an
Demas too.
NFL fringe NFL receiver. Can they replace that type of talent on the edge even with Tunga Bailoa back at quarterback?
Mhm.
I definitely agree. It's a game you got to win. I think if you're going to be on the right side of 6 wins that everybody watching this, I'm
Right.
sure, is hoping for.
For sure. Yeah, that's I guess I should have mathematically kind of quantified all that. So the should wins, that was for me Richmond, Central Michigan, Indiana, Rutgers. So you're looking at 4 wins there. Then Maryland in that probably win category gets you to 5, and then split one with Nebraska and Minnesota. Actually, I forgot Minnesota when I was going through that the first time. And then I have Iowa also up in that tier of having to steal one. Yeah, people can see this with their own eyes instead of me messing it up on the fly when it gets published. But yeah, so it's I'm at 7-5 with that math, with them taking one of those from the split one, taking the should win against Maryland, and the four that they need to win for sure, and then possibly stealing one. So that's where I'm at, 7-5. You're at 6-6. I guess I would say that I have a very, very hard time of seeing them somehow reach 8 wins. I don't know who that would come against. Maybe an injury to Michael Penix or Drew Aller being much worse than advertised. That records go out the window dynamic thing in the Michigan game, I guess, but they're just so strong with running the ball and stopping the run that that's hard to say this year. Where do you see an eighth win coming if you operate off of my 7-5 to begin with, and then are trying to feed the optimist somehow, some way into giving them an eighth?
Let me see here. So that would mean one of the big four, probably,
Yeah,
or an Iowa game.
yeah, or
Um,
beating every single team except the Big Four, which would require almost unprecedented consistency from a team that's then losing to everyone that's really good.
right. I just don't think going to Iowa. That's the first game of the year. I really have a hard time seeing that
I
one.
agree.
Really
I
hard
agree.
time with Washington. As I said, I just think that's such a tough matchup with
Mhm.
their strength of their passing offense against Michigan
Yeah.
State's unproven, I guess we'll say at this point, pass defense.
Mhm.
Um, I do think 5, 6, or 7 wins are the most likely total. I
Mhm.
guess 8 would be the fourth most likely.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, look, I just over the weekend said I think Michigan's gonna win the national title,
Right.
but as we know, I mean, that game gets weird, it gets close,
Yeah.
it gets tight, it gets emotional, all that stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna give them a shot regardless in that
Yeah, for
game. So
sure.
I guess you could sneak one there. Or it would be there or Penn State, I think, as you said.
Okay.
Maybe if Drew Aller isn't ready for the task, and
Yeah.
maybe if his front seven is just clamping everybody down and those running
Right.
backs can't get loose on them, maybe
Mhm.
that's the recipe.
For sure, and I think Penn State's a team that they have beaten even when Penn State is very good.
Right.
Michigan's a team they have beaten when Michigan's very good. Ohio State, just I you didn't mention it. I don't think it's really worth mentioning. I don't think Obviously, other than that time they went down there with a team that was good enough to make the college football playoff, that was the one time that they did it. But don't see that happening this year unless Marvin Harrison Jr. decides to sit out after they lose 2 games before that somehow, some way, and 5 other things go their way, and then yeah, even then I don't know. Even then it's tricky. Washington,
Right.
I'm with you there. It would have to be an injury to Michael Penix for me to even consider that. I think right now I don't know if they even cover that game. I don't think that necessarily means that um, like it's a very negative omen for Michigan State if they don't win that game, or I guess even make that game competitive, because you're talking about a top 5 quarterback in probably the NCAA, maybe top 7. Talking about probably the best receiving core in the Big Ten, other than no, them or not the Big Ten, sorry, in the NCAA, but they might be number one, honestly, at this point. Um, so you're looking
Gotcha.
at a very good air attack there, and you have possibly 60% of your defensive backs being class of 2022 guys. Maybe Caleb Coley steals that job by week 3 and also gets up there 80% possibly. It's just such a tough task, and you're really just going to be relying on a pass rush to get there somehow. And speaking of this pass rush, you have a very good defensive line against the run on paper, I think. Chris Bogle and Zion Young are both big, big, strong defensive ends. Obviously, the interior defensive tackles, we can go on and on about them. All the linebackers that should be seeing the field this year should all be good against the run, but we haven't necessarily seen a bag of kind of pass rush arsenal from any of these guys. And I still worry about the linebackers in pass coverage. The 4 guys that I kind of see in the playing group: Cal Halliday, Jacoby Windman, Jordan Hall, Aaron Brule. None of them really have I guess, a positive trait of pass coverage in their list of strengths and weaknesses. What do you think that the front 7 looks like in terms of helping the pass game? And are people getting a little too excited with kind of giving them credit for anchoring this entire pass game?
I think I'm with you on everything you said. I do worry about the linebackers, holding up, especially against a mind like Kalen DeBoer and
Hmm.
his OC Ryan Grubb, I think is his name. Just the way they
Hmm.
schemed Michigan State up last year was a masterpiece. You had to tip your cap after that. And so, Jacoby Windman was met with the media the other day, and he said he bulked up actually as opposed to dropping weight. And I was expecting he would say the opposite because last year he had to play that two-way position. He's still going to do a lot of that this year, I think, but I figured he would want to shed weight to get better in
Right.
space, covering those middle zones and everything. So yeah, I do worry about that. And then same thing you said. I mean, the D line is stocked up, but what's everybody say? They're big, they're beefy. They're stopping
Mm.
the run. Nobody says like they're crack of the whip, bend the edge type of guys necessarily. So I do wonder about that, just raw ability there. And
Right.
so therefore, how do they make up for that? How do they have to schematically manufacture that pass rush? But look, it's college football. I still think if they're getting guys in 3rd and 12s all the time because they
Right.
are so good against the run, look, a lot of these college quarterbacks, they're just not that good to fit it in these windows on 3rd and long, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 15 consistently. So if they're just blowing up the run repeatedly and putting the offense in really tough down and distances, that will be enough, I think, to
Right.
let these young guys, the Dylan Tatum's of the world,
Yeah.
Malik Spencer's, the DBs, figure
Hmm.
their way out. And by November, maybe we're talking about that as a strength. But at least initially, I think they got to sort of, help those guys out, help those guys
Right.
out a lot.
Yeah, that all makes great sense. I think for the first time since Mel Tucker's been here, the defensive backs are going to have some youthful energy and some optimism for the future. I don't necessarily know how much in a vacuum this unit will be able to cover better than they have in years past. So the end product might not be any different. But I think if you're talking about them once again not being as refined, not being as good, I think for the first time it's going to be for positive silver linings, I guess, there with some of these guys being very young. I think Malik Spencer is a redshirt freshman, and then the other 2 are true sophomores. So yeah, a lot of youth there. Those guys are going to be playing there for a couple years. Next year is probably the ideal goal for them to look polished and like totally cohesive. Who is somebody that is not getting a lot of buzz? I won't even put any like criteria or filters around that. Who on this team, offense or defense, whether it's someone you've seen at practice that stood out in the couple minutes you get to watch per week, or if it's just somebody you've heard chatter about, who's someone that you think will make more of an impact this year than people are giving them credit for?
Yeah, that's interesting. I could go a couple different ways. I mean, you mentioned Zion Young. He's a guy that I think
Right.
is going to be primed for a really big season. Malik Spencer as well. I think could have a really big year. But I guess I feel like people sort of know those guys. I'm really curious about Jaron Mangum in the backfield
Mm,
because I just think that that sort of hammer element is something they
yeah.
haven't really had at the running back position under Mel Tucker. One of the tight ends, or maybe it's
Mhm.
just every tight end that's not Malik Carr, I guess, is
Right.
probably not being talked about enough because like, we
Yeah.
all know Malik and we all, I think everybody assumes he's on the precipice of having a big year, and I'm right there with him. Like he definitely
Yeah.
should, and he could go a long, on the side, he could go a long way toward helping whoever this quarterback is, feeling
Mhm.
nice and comfortable back there. I think, but everybody behind him, everybody's saying Malik's is a much more intentional blocker. He made progress there. There's more want to and effort there, but still they're going to need another one. So
Right.
whether that's Tyneil Hopper, who I think has shown some of that at Boise State, has more of a fullback sort of build there. I mean, the guy's played in like 40 something college games, only has like 20 catches. It's a 6 year guy, so he's not a big downfield threat, but if he
Mhm.
could just make you more solid at that C gap area and give some of those outside runs a chance, that he's going to be an unsung hero of the offense. So somebody like that, maybe it's Jalen Franklin instead, maybe it's Evan Morris instead. If one of those tight ends could step forward and really solidify things as a blocker, I think that would be, definitely something that nobody's talking about. But those guys who mentioned,
Yeah.
Malik, Zion Young,
Mhm.
any of the new D linemen, I think could all have big years. So there's a couple different ways you could go with it.
Yeah. So what are your expectations for Jordan Hall this year? Because in the spring, I was kind of thinking he'd be like one of those strong special teams kind of guys, waits his turn this year, is one of the obviously leaders of next year's team as a redshirt freshman, true sophomore. As the summer has gone on, fall camp has gone on, I've completely reversed course on that and I expect him to firmly be in the rotation. You're closer to getting to see what he looks like with the pads on, whether he looks the part or not. Is it possible that by the end of this year, he could be maybe one of the starting linebackers in, let's say, a 4-3?
That feels like a little too far for me right
Okay.
now. I mean, just look at all the experience he'd have to pass up. No injuries and all that. Just some things crumble the right way, unfortunately for other guys. And then
Mhm.
that comes
Right.
favorable for him. Maybe I don't think so. I do think we'll see him get a handful of defensive series a game. I was with you. I
Mhm.
was like, okay, he'll be on every special teams unit. And then maybe in the fourth quarter a couple times we might see him out there. But I think we're going to see him fairly regularly on the just in regular defensive snaps. I mean, they
Mhm.
love that kid. You talk about what does he look like? I mean, he's the part that you want to look like. I mean, he is the mold. Right? You go out there, you're like, oh man, like where's the freshman at? Because number
Right.
5 is like a junior, who could maybe go to the league after this year if he has a big season. So he is the part. He doesn't look the part. He is the part
Right.
in that respect. So I'm curious to see him too. And can he give them? Can he be a plus player in the coverage? Like you talked about. I mean,
Right.
I don't know if we've seen a lot of Cal Halliday. I think that's an area that they'd like to see him be better.
Yeah.
Winman was a smaller window at that position, so I just don't know. I think Brulet's done some decent stuff there, but yeah, I mean, if that's their top 4 right now, and I still think just throw in, I still think we see Darius Snow sometime this year. I'm not going to
Mm.
say when. I don't know when. I don't know if anybody knows when, but I do think we will see him at some point. But until that looks like the top 4. And
Right.
so, with that being the case, I think Jordan Hall's definitely going to get regular defensive snaps,
Okay.
pretty much every game.
That makes sense. Rotational basis, and then if he can somehow be a better pass coverage guy than the rest, then maybe his potential to play more snaps grows from there. Last year, Michigan State was atrocious in getting like 3 yards when they needed 3 yards. They just I don't know whether you want to blame more the offensive line there or Jalen Berger and Jarek Broussard's lack of vision there. But at the end of the day, I'm sure the blame falls a little bit on everybody. This year, I'm very optimistic on the usage that Jared Mango would be getting in those roles and what he can bring. I think you look around college football, the NFL, it's almost like an art form to get those short yardage, those touchdowns at the goal line, those 4th and 2s. You can have 2 guys that are very good running backs as a whole, like Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, but a guy like Blake Corum will be much more effective inside the 5 yard line than a guy like Donovan Edwards, even though both of them have a bright future at running back. This is where I think that Michigan State can really win in the margins. I guess I don't know if that's really on the margins, but like one small component where they should have a big leg up than they did last year is with Jared Mangum. Is that fair to say? What are you kind of thinking of that running back room outside of Nathan Carter?
Yeah, I agree for sure. I think Jaren, people might say, well, what about Connor Hayward? When I say they haven't had a big back really like this. So, I say, well, go back and look at like 2018,
Right.
2019, some of his touches. And it's just, he was just never
Mhm.
instinctual as a running back. It wasn't necessarily his fault. He was thrown into that position. He did the best he could. And then look, he turned himself into a pro at another position. So I'm not trying to hate on Connor Hayward.
Right.
He plays for my favorite team now. But it just he was never a true running back, and you saw so many yards left on the table and just other things. And even when he did find the hole and hit the hole and went through the hole, he'd get chased down from behind or whatever. Just Jaren brings so much more instincts and just natural feel for the position, I think. So that's going to be better. But I mean, as Mel Tucker will tell you, it was the whole operation last year. I mean, the running backs had their thing. We remember different screw ups there, whether it was
Mhm.
Elijah Collins needed to set up the field goal, needed to go inside to get that straightaway field goal against Indiana, goes outside. Or
Yeah.
like there was like a critical 3rd and 1 at midfield against Washington, and Peyton Thorne and Broussard are on 2 different pages, and
Mhm.
he misses the mesh point, and they just get blown up. There's that. The offensive line I think has been up and down. The tight ends I think have not probably caught enough blame for their role in last year's
Mhm.
run production. So it all does have to work in concert, and they all have to be better. But yeah, having a true power back, I think, will be an element that we'll see that they've been missing, and then just the ability to stay fresh. I mean, I still think I'm not erasing Jalen Berger from this thing. I think he's still going to have a role somewhere, but I do expect Carter is at the top of that. Just based
Mhm.
on it. There's an overwhelming amount of buzz you hear about that kid. So it's
Yeah.
it's too much to ignore. And then
Yeah.
I just think Mangum is so different from Carter that he fills a natural need as a
Yep.
sort of a supplementary, complementary guy. So those
Mhm.
are the two that I look at a lot right now and say, okay,
Yeah.
let's see
Yeah.
what they can do and how they can change this.
For sure. I think, yeah, we don't need to talk too much about Carter because I think everything's been said that from every outlet and everyone you can think of. Essentially, the way I expected, he's probably not going to win the Doak Walker, probably not going to be a Doak Walker finalist, but I think he's going to be as good as they could have hoped to find from a portal running back. If you forget the Kenneth Walker expectation and that comparison, that bar. I think between him and Mangum both being at it there, I'd be curious to see what happens with Jalen Berger's role. One thing I was gonna say that I want to see more from Michigan State's offense this year, before I kind of caught myself and was wondering who would even have that skill set, is more of a usage or involvement in the receiving game. I guess we'll see if Jalen Barberin plays much this year, or if that's more of a next year type thing. But yeah, that would have been nice. But that was kind of Jerk Broussard was probably better at that than anyone on this roster, and even they didn't use him in that much. But I guess yeah. So that's kind of ruining my answer for that question. But is there anything for you, Steven, that you want to see concept wise or personnel wise, scheme wise, that you want to see Michigan State do this year that they didn't really do last year?
I mean, I guess I don't really have much off the top of my head. You've heard more about the idea of them getting back to the QB run. I'm always going to
Mm,
be a fan of that. I mean, it's such a weapon to have, and if Noah Kim is the guy and he's really one of the 20 fastest dudes on the team, which Mel Tucker
hmm.
said like a month ago, then shoot, maybe you really got something there.
Yeah.
I'll just say real quick, going back to Carter, just quickly. I
Yeah.
think I don't think you should expect Kenneth Walker, but I do think he's a guy that'll be able to maximize everything that's in front of him. And I don't think
Hmm.
they did that all the time last year. I mean, if a play is blocked for this much, I think he's going to find the right hole, hit it, and get as much as he can. Whereas I think there was some disconnect last year with,
Yeah.
hey, why did this not work? Well, the hole was there, but the back didn't do this, or vice versa. The back was ready to go and the hole wasn't there, or whatever. But I think Carter will do a lot better job maximizing what's
Yeah.
there to be had and getting what he can get.
Yeah.
Other than that, though, I'd say the QB run, and then just I think I do think they should rotate more of those receivers, like we touched on. I mean, I just
Mm-hmm.
don't think without an alpha dog. I mean, when you had Naylor, you had 3 pros out there. I'm counting Keon Coleman as a future pro.
Yeah.
I think that's safe to say. When you don't have that
For sure.
surefire pro, I think you can reach deeper into there. And why not get a Fitzpatrick some
Yeah.
reps and Montori Foster and all those soft or second year
Right.
guys that we talked about already? I mean, I'd like to see a little more of that. And I think they
100%.
have the ability there.
Yeah, and I guess it's not necessary if the guys that are starting are playing well, but I would say the same thing for the cornerback spot. Just like you can probably see in the first few games, like from an eye test perspective of what they look like, of whether Terry Roberts, Marquis Lowry, and those guys are worth playing ahead of maybe a younger guy like Caleb Coley, letting him take his lumps, develop. What the difference in margin of kind of maybe wins above replacement there would be, or maybe just play them all rotationally. But there's enough guys, enough bodies in that cornerback room. Malcolm Jones, obviously Dylan Tatum, who I've projected as a starter, Charles Brantley, maybe a Chance Rucker, Eddie Pleasant. I know you guys have heard that Ade Wiley has been doing very well in practices. So it's just would be good to see some sample size on some of these guys outside of maybe that Richmond or Central game. Um, I don't really have anything else for you, Steven, but I did want to ask you, how do you see these first two games going? Is it going to be both of these scenarios are going to be where they get the backups in by like middle of the third quarter? Is one of these two teams going to scare them more than you would think, and they might not play the starters until the last drive? What is your kind of just off the cuff take on how these first two games might go?
Yeah, this will probably come back to bite me, but I mean, I'm expecting two blowouts. Honestly, yeah,
Okay.
I think multiple. Both we should see multiple QBs in both games, I think, regardless of if
Hmm.
one guy's here and the next guy's,
Right.
a good gap behind. I just think the margin should get there. I definitely think there will probably be some growing pains offensively with all that new personnel at the skill positions and a new quarterback. But I just think that size on the D line alone should really muddy things up for these two teams and just the caliber of schools and programs that they are, and just the guys that they have up front versus the guys they're going to be trying to block on Michigan State's D line. I mean, that should just
Hmm.
there shouldn't be a lot of openings there. Now, look, if somebody breaks free on a jailbreak screen for 80 yards, or
Right.
one of
Right.
these quarterbacks gets loose, is mobile and shakes free, okay. But over the
Right.
course of 60 plus games, I think that I want to see him dominate them.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, I told Jack Ebling, I think no news is good news because I
Hmm.
don't think you can come out of either of these games, even if they're both 50 to nothing, let's say. I don't think you can say, look, Michigan State's going to be good this year. I told you
Right.
guys, I don't think you can say that.
Right.
But I do think if there's troubling signs, you can go, whoa. So it's like no news is good news. But I do expect two lopsided scores, and I don't think that's indicative of what's to come after that. I just think it's going to be
Right.
indicative of the difference between Power Five football and
Right.
middle tier FBS or FCS.
Right. Sounds good. Well, appreciate you, Steven, making all this time and coming out here and talking about what you think is going to happen this year. Hopefully you're spot on with that 6-6. Hopefully, I think the fans are hoping that I'm more right with the 7-5.
I
But
was
either
saying
way,
I'm not rooting for it. I want you guys to all be happy, have a good time, but that's just
right.
where I'm at right now.
For sure, for sure. But everyone, make sure you read Steven's piece when it comes out here with the record predictions in the coming days, and then also everything else that he writes. And like I said, thanks again, Steven. Really appreciate all your time.
Definitely, of course, man. Thanks for having me on. Good luck with the rest of the season, and I'm sure we'll be
Yeah.
talking soon.
For sure. See you in the press box in the coming weeks. But with that, thanks for listening to this week's episode of the SD4L show. And hope you enjoyed our season preview. And we will see you back here shortly in a couple of days.